Imagine a room, right? The air is just thick with these competing smells. You've got like ozone on one side and heavy crude oil on the other.
Oh, yeah, that's a great mental image.
Right. And sitting at this heavy scarred oak table, on one side, you have a man who basically built an empire out of steel and sweat. A guy who looked at a world that was entirely powered by, the muscle and bone of millions of horses, and he just decided to override it.
Completely override it with the internal combustion engine.
Exactly. And then sitting right across from him at that exact same table is a guy who is dedicating his entire life, and frankly, billions of dollars, to killing that very same combustion engine.
He's trying to replace it all with lithium, software, and the electrical grid.
Yeah. So today, for you listening, we are doing a deep dive into this incredibly fascinating source material. We are mapping out a hypothetical collision, really, between Henry Ford and Elon Musk.
And I have to say, this is probably one of the most intellectually ambitious pieces of source material we've analyzed in a while.
Oh, absolutely.
Because we aren't just looking at, like, two biographies placed side by side on a desk. The source actually maps out this highly conceptual dialogue between these two figures. It takes a historical titan who completely rewired the physical infrastructure of the early 20th century.
Right, Ford.
Yeah, Ford. And it places him right across from a contemporary titan who is attempting the exact same scale of disruption just, in the 21st century.
So we're going to completely deconstruct the core of this hypothetical meeting today. We'll look at the shared, really just the psychological brutality of their startup phases.
The adversity is just wild.
It really is. And the astonishing parallels in how they both forced brand new infrastructure onto a completely resistant society. And then ultimately, we're going to get into their sweeping debate on the future of human labor and extending off the planet.
Which gets pretty philosophical.
It gets deep. For you listening, think of this deep dive as a masterclass in the anatomy of a paradigm shift. If you want to understand how massive technological changes actually happen, like how do we actually move from a dirt road to a Martian colony, you really have to understand the sheer, almost irrational willpower required to tear down the old world.
Yeah, you have to break things. And to really understand the future that they debate at the end of this source material, we first have to kind of ground ourselves in the parallel transitions that define them.
The core shifts.
Right. So the text opens by comparing Ford's era, which is moving society from horse-drawn carriages to automobiles, with Musk's era, transitioning from internal combustion engine vehicles or ICE vehicles to electric vehicles.
Okay, I want to stop right there and just put this whole premise under a microscope for a second.
Sure.
Because the source treats the shift from the carriage to the gas car as fundamentally equivalent to the shift from the gas car to the EV. And I mean, I struggle to buy that equivalence on its face.
Yeah.
Well, moving from a living, breathing, biological animal, a literal horse, to a machine made of steel that runs on controlled explosions, that feels like a total rupture in the human timeline.
It was. It absolutely was.
Right. But an EV, I mean, it still has four wheels. It has a steering wheel, a windshield, and, it's in the exact same traffic jam as a Honda Civic. It kind of feels like Musk is just applying a heavy software patch to the existing automobile paradigm that Ford already created.
I get why it looks that way. Visually, they do occupy the exact same footprint on the asphalt.
Exactly.
But that footprint completely masks the scale of the disruption. Structurally, and especially economically, swapping an internal combustion engine for an electric drivetrain is, well, it is every bit as violent an upheaval as replacing the horse.
Okay, walk me through that, because I'm not seeing the violence of swapping an engine for a battery.
So consider the infrastructure required to support the horse back in the year 1900. It wasn't just like a guy riding around in a buggy. Major cities had hundreds of thousands of horses living inside them.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I guess you don't think about the sheer volume.
Right. The entire urban economy was built around biological maintenance. You had these massive, sweeping supply chains just for hay and oats.
Farming just to feed the transport.
Exactly. And you had blacksmiths on every corner, stable hands, harness makers, and, frankly, armies of street sweepers dealing with thousands of tons of manure every single day.
God, the smell must have been unbelievable.
He was dictating everything, the physical layout of a city, the literal smell of the air. It was all dictated by the biological limitations of the animal.
So when Ford comes along, he didn't just sell a neat new machine. He basically forced the eradication of that entire biological supply chain.
He annihilated it. He introduced a machine that demanded an entirely alien ecosystem. I mean, a Model T is essentially a paperweight without a global network of oil extraction.
Right, you can't just feed it oats.
No, it required deep-water drilling, the invention of these massive chemical refineries to crack crude oil into gasoline.
Fleets of tanker ships.
Yes, and subterranean storage tanks at every corner gas station. He essentially forced governments to pave millions of miles of dirt roads with asphalt. So he killed an entrenched biological industry to birth a mechanical combustible one.
Okay, I see. So it's like he changed the literal operating system of the physical world. He upgraded humanity from biological power to mechanical power.
That's a great way to put it. An operating system upgrade. And that brings us to the internal combustion engine's current status. Because that infrastructure, Ford, helped birth. It is now the entrenched trillion-dollar global ecosystem.
The default setting.
Right. The world's geopolitics, its universities teaching specific mechanical engineering disciplines, its massive supply chains, they are all built around the extraction, refinement, and combustion of liquid hydrocarbons.
So when Musk pushes the EV...
He is demanding the death of that century-old ecosystem.
But I mean, is swapping gas for electricity really as heavy a lift as building the entire oil industry from scratch? Like, we already have an electrical grid, right? We have power lines everywhere. You literally just plug the car in.
You'd think so, but no. The existing grid was never, ever designed to absorb the entire transportation sector.
Oh.
It's like trying to replace the foundation of a skyscraper while people are still living up in the penthouses.
Wow. Okay.
The EV transition requires a complete reimagining of base load versus peak load power generation. And beyond the grid, think about the supply chain. The supply chain for an internal combustion engine involves casting aluminum and steel, right? Machining parts to contain these tiny controlled explosions.
Very mechanical.
Very. But the supply chain for an EV is fundamentally chemical. It requires mining hundreds of millions of tons of lithium, nickel, manganese, cobalt.
Right, the battery materials.
Exactly. It requires chemical processing facilities that literally didn't even exist a decade ago.
Yeah.
It demands gigawatt-scale battery cell manufacturing.
So you are basically replacing a mechanical engineering supply chain with an electrochemical one.
Exactly. And it also requires a massive behavioral shift from the public. Instead of a localized weekly habit of, pumping a combustible liquid into a tank in 3 minutes at a gas station.
Which we all take for granted now.
Right. Instead of that, the user has to adapt to localized distributed power management, plugging into a grid overnight at home.
Which is a totally different way of thinking about fueling your life.
It is. Both the carriage to auto and IC to EV shifts require immense conviction from the innovator because society naturally resists infrastructure replacement. Like, in 1905, the horse worked perfectly fine for the average person.
True.
And in 2010, the gas car worked perfectly fine. The innovator is forcing a massive, friction-heavy upgrade on a public that actively resents the disruption.
Which actually brings us to a super fascinating turn in the source material. A significant portion of this conceptual dialogue between Ford and Musk is devoted to these two men discussing the severe adversity of their startup phases.
Yeah, the crucible.
Right. They spend so much time analyzing the psychological toll of forcing this unwanted infrastructure onto the world. But, I mean, building a new supply chain is really just a business problem, right? Why does the text frame this as a shared crucible, almost like two war veterans comparing stars?
Because the status quo possesses an immune system. And it actively attacks anyone attempting to rewrite its rules.
The immune system of the old world. I like that.
Yeah, the resistance isn't passive. We view the Model T and the Tesla Model 3 as these inevitable successes in hindsight, right?
Of course. They're everywhere.
But in the actual moment of creation, both men faced almost total public skepticism, intense media ridicule, and the very real threat of personal and professional annihilation.
Well, just the cost of capital alone is staggering. When you require billions of dollars to build something that no one even wants yet, how do you even convince the banks?
You usually don't.
Exactly. And in Ford's case, he wasn't just fighting public skepticism about cars. He was fighting a literal legal monopoly. The source goes into detail about the Selden patent.
Yeah, the Selden patent fight is crucial context here. So, George Selden held this incredibly broad patent on the very concept of an automobile.
The concept itself.
Yes. The entrenched powers of the early auto industry formed an association to enforce this patent. They were effectively deciding who was allowed to build cars and who wasn't.
A total cartel.
Exactly. And they sued Ford, trying to crush him before he could run the affordable car to the masses. He spent years fighting this massive, exhausting legal battle against the entire industry establishment, just trying to keep his company afloat. He was entirely isolated.
It's like climbing an impossible mountain. And Musk's parallel to that isolation is the 2008 financial crisis,
The 2008 crisis, combined with the extreme struggles of the original Tesla Roadster,
which kept getting delayed, right?
constantly delayed. Musk was pouring his personal fortune from PayPal into a car company. And keep in mind, an American car company hadn't succeeded from scratch since Chrysler in the 1920s.
Wow, I didn't realize it had been that long.
Yeah. The traditional automotive industry publicly laughed at the idea of using a laptop battery to power a car. I mean, the media was literally running Tesla death watch columns.
Tesla death watch, that's brutal.
He was facing bankruptcy in both Tesla and SpaceX simultaneously. He was relying on last-minute funding rounds just to make payroll on Christmas Eve. The psychological isolation of that moment, when the entire world, including the financial markets, the media, and industry experts, is telling you that your vision is physically and economically impossible, it is a profoundly lonely place.
It's like these two guys took completely different routes up the exact same impossible, deadly mountain peak, and they finally meet at the summit just to compare their scars.
That's a really apt analogy.
But here's where it gets really interesting to me, and I want to hear your take on this. Why is this mutual praise highlighted as such a key part of this source material? Like, does an innovator at this absolute top level fundamentally need validation from the only other person in history who has truly been there?
I think they do, because almost no one else understands the sheer terror of what we call vertical integration out of necessity.
Okay, yes, the source highlights vertical integration as a major bonding point between them.
Right, because the existing world simply could not supply what their visions demanded. Vertical integration is the physical manifestation of their isolation.
Explain that a bit more.
Well, if the world doesn't believe in your product, they won't build factories to supply you, period. Ford realized early on that to mass-produce the Model T and actually drive the price down, he couldn't rely on third-party suppliers.
Because they were too expensive.
Too expensive.
Yeah.
And they were entirely beholden to the steel trusts and the rubber monopolies. They couldn't meet his massive volume, and they certainly wouldn't meet his target price.
So his solution was to just build the River Rouge complex.
Yes, River Rouge. And calling it a complex doesn't do it justice. It was a marvel of industrial brutalism and extreme efficiency. It wasn't just an assembly plant.
It was everything.
Everything. Ford bought iron mines in Minnesota. He bought coal mines in Kentucky. He bought forests in Michigan just for the wood used in the cars. And he even established rubber plantations down in Brazil.
Wait, he owned the rubber plantations too?
Yes. At River Rouge, raw iron ore would arrive on a freighter at the docks, and literally 28 hours later, it would drive off the assembly line as a finished, working automobile.
That is mind-blowing.
He had to own the entire physical stack of reality, from the dirt in the ground to the steering wheel in your hand, because the free market completely refused to accommodate his scale.
Now, lay that exact template over Musk in the Gigafactory. The parallels are crazy.
The parallel is almost exact. It's just shifted from steel and coal to electrochemistry. When Tesla decided to mass-produce the Model 3, they calculated the number of lithium-ion batteries required to hit their targets.
And what did the math say?
The math revealed that Tesla alone would need more lithium-ion batteries in a single year than the entire global supply chain produced for every laptop, cell phone, and electronic device combined.
So the supply chain didn't just lack capacity, it practically didn't exist at the scale he needed.
Exactly. And the traditional auto industry told Musk, just buy batteries from existing suppliers like Panasonic. But Panasonic wouldn't build a multi-billion-dollar factory for a weird car company that everyone assumed would be bankrupt in 6 months.
Naturally.
So Musk had to build the Gigafactory out in Nevada. He had to source raw lithium, secure his own chemical refinement deals, and build literally the largest footprint building in the world just to manufacture the foundational component of his vehicle.
He had to become a battery manufacturer.
A battery manufacturer, an energy storage company, and an AI software developer, all simultaneously. The traditional auto industry, which was built entirely around outsourcing components to third parties and just assembling them, was utterly unequipped to understand this approach.
You know, it really changes how you look at the vehicles themselves. Like, when you see a vintage Model T at a show, or when you see a Tesla passing you on the highway, you aren't just looking at a neat mode of transportation.
No, you're not.
You are looking at a surviving artifact, an artifact from a brutal entrepreneurial war. The vehicle is the physical proof that the innovator successfully beat the immune system of the old world into submission.
That's a powerful way to frame it. And acknowledging that shared trauma, that war, sets the stage for the final act of the source material.
Right, because they don't just dwell on the past.
Exactly. Once you establish that both men possess this extremely rare capability to force physical reality to bend to their will, their hypothetical debate shifts from what they've already built to what they're attempting to build next.
The expanding frontier, the text moves from, paving dirt roads to paving the stars. It outlines this massive debate covering SpaceX, multiplanetary expansion, and the humanoid robot Optimus.
It scales up dramatically.
It does. Let's map the scale of this for you listening, because Ford's impact was undoubtedly massive, but it was essentially two-dimensional, wasn't it?
Yes, Ford fundamentally reorganized the X and Y axes of human existence. Before the affordable automobile, human geography was tightly constrained by the distance a person could realistically walk, or maybe a horse could ride, in an hour. Cities were incredibly dense, crowded, and heavily centralized around rail lines.
I had to live near the train.
Exactly. By introducing mass personal mobility, Ford essentially created the modern suburb. He stretched cities outward. He connected isolated rural farms to urban markets. He flattened the world spatially, making distance manageable for the average citizen.
But Musk's vision, as outlined in this debate in The Source, abandons that two-dimensional map entirely. He is pushing for multi-dimensional expansion.
Oh, absolutely.
Vertical expansion off the gravity well of Earth with SpaceX, and then redefining physical reality itself on the ground with Optimus.
Let's address the vertical expansion first. The goal of making humanity a multiplanetary species by colonizing Mars.
Which is just a staggering thought.
It is. The physics and the logistics of this make building the Gigafactory look like a high school science fair project.
Yeah, building cars is hard, but space is space.
Exactly. Ford battled the entrenched interests of the oil and steel industries. But with SpaceX, Musk is battling the fundamental tyranny of the rocket equation.
The rocket equation. For those listening who might not be aerospace engineers, that's the fact that to carry more payload to space, you need more fuel. But that extra fuel adds weight, which requires even more fuel to lift, right?
That's it, exactly. It creates this vicious exponential curve of difficulty. And for decades, the entire aerospace industry just accepted that rockets were expendable.
Which seems so crazy in hindsight.
It does. You build a highly complex machine for hundreds of millions of dollars, you fly it exactly once, and then you just let it drop into the ocean to be destroyed.
Imagine doing that with a 747.
Right. It made space access so prohibitively expensive that only national superpowers could afford it. So Musk applied the first principles thinking of the auto industry, the idea that a vehicle must be reusable to be economically viable, and he applied it to orbital mechanics.
Landing the rockets.
Yes. Landing orbital-class boosters backwards on a launch pad or a drone ship fundamentally altered the economics of spaceflight.
But the source focuses specifically on Mars, not just low Earth orbit. And going to orbit is one thing. Trying to build a self-sustaining civilization on a dead rock millions of miles away is something else entirely.
It's a completely different paradigm.
Because Ford's supply chain, as massive as it was, relied on Earth's abundant resources. Mars has no breathable atmosphere. It has extreme radiation and only a fraction of Earth's gravity.
Mars is the ultimate hostile startup environment.
That's a great way to put it.
You cannot just ship a finished supply chain to Mars. It's too far and it's too heavy.
Yeah.
You have to utilize in situ resource utilization.
Living off the land.
Basically, yes. The source text implicitly relies on technologies like the Sabatier reaction.
Oh, right, taking the carbon dioxide.
Taking the carbon dioxide from the Martian atmosphere, combining it with hydrogen extracted from subsurface ice, and synthesizing methane and liquid oxygen right there on the planet to fuel the return rockets. You are talking about building autonomous chemical refineries on another planet using remote robotics. Now, Ford would intimately understand the logistical nightmare of this. He had to figure out how to ship raw rubber out of the Amazon jungle.
But Musk has to figure out how to manufacture rocket fuel on a planet where absolutely nothing grows.
Precisely. The scale of the problem is just astronomical.
Which actually brings up what I think is the most philosophical clash in the entire source material, the introduction of Optimus.
Oh, the robot. Yeah.
Because if Mars is about human survival, an insurance policy for consciousness against an extinction event on Earth, what is Optimus? The source directly parallels Optimus with the Model T.
And this is where the debate in the text really cuts to the bone of human economics. Ford's introduction of the Model T moved the world from biological transportation to mass-produced mechanical transportation.
Right, we covered that.
But Optimus represents the attempt to move from a world where labor itself is entirely biological to one where physical labor is mass-produced and mechanical.
Okay, I see the symmetry there, but I really have to push back hard on the economic reality of this.
Go for it.
Because Ford's entire genius wasn't just the moving assembly line, it was the $5 workday. In 1914, he more than doubled the standard industrial wage for his workers.
He did. It shocked the world.
And the narrative is always that he did this so his workers could actually afford to buy the very cars they were building. He essentially created the middle-class consumer.
Well, the reality of the $5 workday was slightly more pragmatic than pure philanthropy.
Oh, really?
Yeah. The assembly line was so brutally monotonous, so physically and psychologically draining, that Ford's turnover rate was astronomical.
I can imagine. Just turning the same wrench for 10 hours.
Exactly. He had to hire tens of thousands of men a year just to keep a consistent workforce of 10,000 on the floor. Men would just walk off the job mid-shift. Human biology and human psychology were the absolute bottlenecks of his manufacturing process.
So the money was a bribe to stay.
Essentially. He paid $5 a day to stop his workers from quitting, which inadvertently birthed the mass consumer class.
But that inadvertently birthed the modern economy. I mean, an economy based on consumers earning wages through physical or intellectual labor and then using those wages to buy goods.
Right.
If Musk successfully scales Optimus, a generalized humanoid robot that can just replace a human on a factory floor or in a warehouse or in agriculture, he removes that biological bottleneck.
Totally removes it.
But he also potentially removes the wage earner. If robots build the Teslas, who earns the money to buy them? Doesn't automating labor destroy the very consumer base needed to sustain the empire?
You have just articulated the exact paradox that makes their hypothetical debate in the text so dense.
It's a massive contradiction.
It is. Ford optimized human labor to create a consumer. Musk is attempting to decouple human labor from economic output entirely.
Decouple it entirely.
Yes. Think about it. If you can mass produce a generalized humanoid robot, the cost of labor asymptotically approaches the cost of the electricity required to charge the robot, plus the materials used to build it.
So the cost of everything just collapses.
In theory, yes. If labor costs drop to near zero, the cost of building housing, the cost of food production, the cost of manufacturing consumer goods, all of it plummets.
Wow.
Optimus is essentially an attempt to initiate a post-scarcity economy. The transition wouldn't just be an operating system update for physical infrastructure. It would be a fundamental update to the very concept of human value.
Because we wouldn't need to work to survive.
Right. For millennia, a human's societal value has been largely tied to their physical or cognitive utility in the labor market. If a machine can replicate that utility at a fraction of the cost, society has to fundamentally restructure how resources are distributed.
You are talking about a societal shift that makes the invention of the car look like a minor scheduling adjustment.
It's unfathomably huge.
And picture Ford sitting across the table listening to this. He's a man who looked at a line of sweating men with wrenches and saw the absolute pinnacle of efficiency. To ask him to conceptualize a world where the assembly line itself steps off the track, walks over, and starts building the factory, it's a staggering cognitive leap.
It is. Yet, if you read the source closely, Ford is arguably the only historical figure equipped to actually make that leap.
Why do you say that?
Because he deeply understands the mechanics of scale. He understands that any complex system is really just a series of simplified, repeatable actions. He would look at an Optimus robot not as like science fiction magic, but as the ultimate extension of his own philosophy.
The ultimate machine.
Exactly. It is the machine that builds the machine. It is the absolute mastery over the physical world that he began when he first opened River Rouge.
It is just wild to think about these two specific minds examining the architecture of reality together. We started this deep dive by comparing the disruption of new technology to, like, the minor hesitation of updating a phone screen.
Right, which seems so trivial now.
Exactly, because peeling back the layers of this source material exposes the terrifying, awe-inspiring mechanics of how the physical world is actually dragged into the future.
It forces a recognition of causality, really. The infrastructure all around us isn't a natural formation. The paved roads, the gas stations, the electrical grids, the fiber optic cables, none of it was inevitable.
Someone had to force it into existence.
Yes.
We analyzed the carriage to automobile shift, recognizing how Ford completely annihilated a biological urban ecosystem and replaced it with a combustible one. And we paralleled that with the current friction-heavy shift from the century-old internal combustion supply chain to the new electrochemical reality of the EV grid.
And we dissected the psychological crucible required to enact those massive
It's
shifts.
trauma.
Yeah, the sheer financial terror of the Selden patent fight and the 2008 financial collapse. We examined the brutal necessity of vertical integration from the iron ore of River Rouge to the massive lithium processing of the Gigafactory.
Proving that innovators must often build the very tools required to build their vision just because the world refuses to provide them.
Exactly. And then we followed that shared logic out to its absolute extremes. We contrasted Ford's two-dimensional conquest of distance with Musk's multi-dimensional push against the rocket equation to reach Mars.
And we grappled with the economic paradox of Optimus, moving from Ford's creation of the waged consumer to a potential post-scarcity reality where human labor is completely decoupled from survival.
Well, it's a lot to process.
It is. But here is the takeaway for you listening. Every single time you merge onto a highway, or you plug in a device, or you watch a rocket land itself backwards on a drone ship out in the ocean, you are interacting with the surviving artifacts of these brutal wars against the status quo.
You're living inside the results.
You are living inside the updated operating system of human society, a system built by people who simply refuse to accept the default settings.
And the overarching lesson of their conceptual meeting in this text is that the operating system is never actually finished. The default will always be challenged.
Always. Which leaves us with a massive question to chew on. The source paired a historical titan of the 20th century with a contemporary titan of the 21st century to map our current trajectory.
Right.
But if this multi-planetary, post-scarcity, robot-assisted future actually takes hold, who is the next visionary sitting across from Musk in a thought experiment 100 years from now?
What a question.
What unimaginable bottleneck of physics or reality will they be trying to shatter? And what impossible transition will they be trying to force upon a world that thinks it has already reached the pinnacle of progress?
It makes you wonder what the next impossible mountain looks like.
It really does. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep looking closely at the heavy infrastructure around you. It's really the only way to see the invisible forces pushing us forward.